Congressman Barr, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me today.
Great to be with you, Jacqueline.
So let's start with the issues that people are talking about the most, which is obviously inflation, first of all. There's a lot of things happening in the country and that have led us to this point. We're coming out of COVID, there was a lot of financial stimulus, and I think when we first all started to get back to normal, people wondered what's happening with the economy. We thought there would be a huge dip, and there wasn't. But now prices are going up on everything, and there's talk of a recession sooner than later. So what's being talked about at the federal level to kind of calm these financial woes we're experiencing?
Well, no doubt we are facing an inflation crisis, the likes we have not seen in 40 years. The consumer price index hit 8.6% in May. That's the highest rate of inflation since 1981. And the problem is a supply-demand mismatch. We have excess demand created by overspending. There was $1 trillion of unspent COVID money when Democrats and President Biden passed the American Rescue Plan. 90% of that had nothing to do with COVID, and that created massive excess demand in the economy, $2 trillion on top of the unspent $1 trillion. And then there was a constraint of labor and energy, a policy that the Biden administration pursued that took us from energy dominance to energy poverty. We started producing a lot less energy, millions of barrels less energy, less oil, because of canceled infrastructure projects like the Keystone XL pipeline, like less refinery capacity, 4,400 permits that have been held up, a halting of lease sales for oil and natural gas. So we've become now less energy independent and more dependent on foreign sources of energy. That has resulted in $5 a gallon gasoline. That is why Americans are paying at the pump more than twice what they were paying on the day President Biden took office. So that's what's going on here. So, and on top of all of that, those bad fiscal policy errors that created excess demand and constrained supply, you also had some major mistakes by the Federal Reserve. That when all the signs were happening after the American Rescue Plan was passed, that this inflation was getting out of control, they continued their quantitative easing too long. They kept interest rates too low for too long, and that exacerbated the inflation crisis. Now they're behind the curve, they're trying to catch up, and the precipitous rate increases that they are pursuing, while needed to fight inflation, are creating massive volatility in the financial markets, and there's this huge sell-off as a result. That's why we may be heading for a recession and a period of stagflation that we're going to really have to fight hard to get out of.
And that's what we hear a lot about is the interest rates, and there's a lot of things that are leading to a huge problem. But what could be done at the federal level to kind of help with this? Because obviously it's businesses, it's all Americans who are concerned about what comes next for them. What does come next, and what can Congress do about it?
On the demand side, the Federal Reserve does have to have resiliency. They have to have fortitude in sticking with the tightening program, even if it results in short-term pain with higher interest rates, because we've got to get this inflation under control. And even in the face of a continued slide in the financial markets less lending, and obviously you'd have higher interest rates in the housing market, all of that will slow down the economy. But on the supply side, to really get the economy going again, to fix the supply chain bottlenecks, we need more business investment. We need more capital expenditures. And you don't get that when you have the threat of higher taxes. You don't get that when you have more regulation and red tape, particularly in the financial sector. You don't get that when you have more regulations on energy and you continue to constrain the supply of energy. So the way to fix it is for the Federal Reserve to continue to tighten, but then partner that with a pro-growth tax and regulatory policy and start producing energy again. Now, admittedly, the political environment is not such right now where we're going to be cutting taxes, slashing regulations, or producing more fossil energy, because that's not where the Biden administration is. So we're hopeful that with a change in the composition of the Congress after the election, that we can force some of those changes with vigorous oversight over the regulatory agencies, stopping the threat of higher taxes, and then pushing a pro-energy agenda.
And speaking of energy, you've talked about gas prices a little bit, but let's dive a little deeper into that, because obviously while we're dealing with inflation and a pending recession, we also have huge problems at the pump. There's a lot of talk about freezing the gas tax. The governor here in Kentucky went ahead and did that. It was supposed to go up July 1, so that's saving people 1 cent per gallon. And obviously President Biden has asked you guys to look at that as well from the federal level. But there's a lot of concern from economists about doing that because it's a short-term fix that hurts road projects and things, funding for those as well. So do you guys think you will take that up? And obviously you talked about energy independence. What else can be done to help bring down the price at the pump outside of freezing the gas tax?
We don't need a temporary 1 penny or 16-cent reduction in gas prices. We need a permanent $2.50 reduction in a gallon of the cost of gasoline. That's what we need. And to do that, we need to produce more energy. We don't need any of these tax gimmicks that, as you say, would threaten infrastructure projects and the way we finance infrastructure. We just need to produce more energy. We need to reduce regulation on energy production development. We need more financing of energy. And on the Financial Services Committee, what I've really been focused on is the weaponization of financial regulation against American energy. The environmental social governance movement, and then what we've seen at the bank regulators trying to discourage conventional bank financing of energy projects, and now the Securities and Exchange Commission weaponizing securities regulation with this ESG disclosure rulemaking, a 535-page monstrosity that would require public companies to disclose not only the emissions from their own operations, but the emissions from the power that they consume, and even the emissions of their customers and their suppliers. This would reach into non-public private companies. It would be very burdensome and onerous. It's transparently an effort to redirect financing and capital away from energy companies, starving energy companies of the financing that they need for this very capital-intensive industry. And then all the while hurting the very investors that the SEC is supposed to be protecting. Because look, when you take energy out of your investment portfolio, you have a less diverse portfolio. It's investing 101. And many of these ESG funds, not only do they underperform non-ESG funds, they underperform the market as a whole. And so they hurt these retail investors. They also come with higher fees. These asset managers who push these ESG funds earn 43% higher in fees. That also eats into their return. So I'm pushing legislation that would require asset managers, investment advisors, ERISA plan sponsors to prioritize investment returns, financial performance over these non-pecuniary factors such as emissions.
Now, we're at a place in our country where it feels like everybody is very divided and it's hard to get things done in Congress. But there is a bill that's moving in Congress, and that's sponsored by you, and that's the Carroll Act that's honoring your late wife. And so tell me a little bit about the bill and where we are in the process with that.
Well, there's unfortunately 25,000 Americans like my wife who lose their life suddenly with very little warning. To sudden cardiac death as a result of mitral valve prolapse or valvular heart disease. It happens more frequently with young women. We really don't know why. So after this tragedy profoundly impacted my family, I went to the National Heart, Lung, Blood Institute. I asked a lot of questions of cardiologists about this. I learned a lot about this heart disease crisis that we have. And just trying to do something that will make a difference for other families. We came up with a really good bill that will provide more research, more funding for research for cardiologists to help identify at-risk individuals. People who have mitral valve prolapse, only about 0.2% actually suffer a fatal event. So it's mostly benign. We need research to identify, okay, what do we need to do to differentiate the vast majority of the population where this is a benign condition versus those individuals who have life-threatening situation so that we can have life-saving intervention. And that's what the research is designed to do. We worked with the National Heart, Blood, Lung Institute, the American College of Cardiology, the American Heart Association to come up with this bill. It's endorsed by all of these groups. Women's Heart Health is behind it as well. Great bipartisan support in the House. We passed it unanimously. It came out of the Senate Health Committee just recently, last month. Bipartisan support there. Leader Mitch McConnell is the Republican lead in the Senate. My former colleague, Democratic Senator Kyrsten Sinema, is the Democrat lead in the Senate. We're now hopeful that we'll get it hotlined to the Senate, and then there were some technical changes in the Senate, so it'll come back to the House. Then hopefully we can put it on the president's desk by the end of this session. So I'm very hopeful that we are close. We are almost there, and if we can get it signed into law, that means more research for more families and more people we can save.
Absolutely. Well, Congressman Barr, I want to thank you so much again for taking the time today, and we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you very much.